Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 379, Pop Culture and Whatnot with Jim Calafiore. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, drnorge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the Whatnot Segulent and the Duke of You Know. On this episode, we had a special opportunity to speak with artist and friend of the show, Jim Calafiore, about his work on the book Leaving Megalopolis. Jim's work you'll recognize on such awesome books as Hawkman from DC, Secret Six from DC, and of course Exiles from Marvel. And that's really just a very limited view of his wonderful catalog. We are just thrilled to have the opportunity to have him back on the show. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network and the League of Comic Book Podcasts. Sponsoring this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com, it's that time of the month again where if you haven't had a chance to get in your orders, you want to sneak them in really fast. But if you have, you want to be on the lookout because we're getting ready to kick into the beginning of February where they put up the brand new deals. This is my favorite time of the month because I love to see what they're going to offer us next. Remember that you can pre-order anything from the previews catalog from DCBService.com. It's a great opportunity to save money and to pre-order those items that you really want to have, whether it's single issues, hardcovers, trades, statues, action figures, you name it, DCBService.com is your pre-order source. Remember, they're a digital partner. Whether you go through Comixology, iVerse Digital Media, or MyDigitalComics.com, you get 5% of those purchases back towards your DCB service order, and it doesn't cost you anything more to do that. So it's great to link those accounts, and you're supporting a friend of our show. Over at InStockTrades.com, this is one of the things I really love about InStockTrades.com. They have a vast catalog of collected editions, and I did a quick search for Secret Six, and right away popped up Secret Six, The Darkest Hour trade paperback. Friend of the show, Jim Calafiore, was the artist on this. It collects issues 30 to 36 and Doom Patrol number 19. A member of the team is determined to bring back a loved one from the gates of hell, and Bane must face his inner demons. If you haven't read Secret Six, it's a great opportunity through trade to go back now and be able to pick those up. They also have his collected work from Exiles over at InStockTrades.com as well. So it's a great opportunity to bundle a lot of those together. If you're new to Jim Calafiore's work, it's a great opportunity to grab some of that and get up on it because he's an amazing artist. I do like to do a search for artists and writers over at InStockTrades.com and see what pops up. That's a lot of times I mentioned on this episode how I don't always catch everything that a artist is doing or a writer is doing, and that's a lot of times the way I'll do it, where I'll see a trade paperback pop up and they'll show me something that I didn't realize that this creator was involved in. So it's a cool opportunity to do that. I want to thank DCB Service and InStockTrades.com for supporting our show. There's not a traditional show spoiler warning on this one, and that's because we do spoil like the first quarter of the book, Leaving Megalopolis, but this is an original graphic novel that was done through Kickstarter, and it is going to be re-released digitally through Comixology and hopefully as a paper version through Dark Horse. And because of that, we felt that it was best to do like a meaty spoiler about the first quarter of the book, and also to talk about Jim Calafiore did a backup story that's a part of this as well, so we talk pretty in-depth about that as well, to get into the philosophy and the design and all the cool stuff that we want to know behind the scenes. We also talk about what it was like to get a Kickstarter going and how that's different from doing a regular monthly book, and just kind of the questions that we want to ask for this type of project. So it was cool to have the opportunity to talk to Jim about this. So it's not spoiling the entire book, so if you haven't read it, please feel free to join us because it's a great way to get to know what Leaving Megalopolis is all about. But there's also hopefully strong enough content here for those of you that have read it that want to geek out with us about how cool this book is.
Spinning with great speed, the Flash creates a protective vacuum around himself.
Joining us in a very special discussion about a book that's near and dear to Jim and myself, Leaving Megalopolis, is Jim Calafiore. And Jim, welcome back to Raging Bullets.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
And this book is near and dear to my heart, especially because it's a kind of a getting the band back together. Secret Six is on my short list. It's easily in my top 5 of favorite books of all time when I look at a whole series. It's the rereadability.
Thank you.
I've repurchased this. I have the series in the paper version, but I've repurchased it as it's been coming out on digital on Comixology.
Oh, okay.
Because
you are obsessed.
Yeah, it's a great series. It's one of those. Well, it's the same thing that you do when you buy singles and then you go to the trade for the readability. I'm finding that I'm doing that now with the iPad.
Okay.
When the Kickstarter was announced, and I heard that you guys were going to be doing something together, and then Jason Wright was brought in as the colorist. I was grinning from ear to ear. Can you tell us a little bit of the genesis of this? How did this start? Like, where did this come from?
I mean, the basic reason for it was exactly what you said. How many people were still a year later coming up to us at shows and saying how they loved Secret Six and how pissed they were that it got canceled. And I'd say, yeah, I was pissed it was canceled too. That's the basic way it got into my head. The way it occurred with Kickstarter is I had been aware of Kickstarter for maybe a few months. The Kickstarter campaign went in 2012, I think. So it must have been early 2012 when I had learned of Kickstarter. I hadn't been familiar with it. And I thought it looked really cool. And if you've read the acknowledgement in the credits page of the book itself, it really wasn't my initial idea. I was just at a show talking to a couple guys, talking to, other professionals. And I was just sitting there talking with Brandon Montclair, who does a lot of work with Amy Reeder, if you're familiar with her.
Yes, yeah.
And Rodney Ramos, inker, Transmet and all that. And they argue over who gets the most credit, but I think as they've told me it's been done, it happened. Brandon just made a comment that I should do something on Kickstarter. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And Rodney says, you should do something with Gail. I'm like, oh, yeah. That's the little behind-the-scenes anecdote of the creation of it. So basically, I emailed Gail. I said, do you want to work on something? And I mentioned Kickstarter. And she was immediately receptive and sent me 2 or 3 barely a paragraph ideas of 3 different concepts. And I zoned in on Megalopolis, leaving Megalopolis.
To me, this is the perfect book to have done because being that the theme turned into, in its own way, being like a spiritual successor, love letter to the fans, whatever you want to call it, that to the fans of Secret Six. For me, as a fan of Secret Six, this felt page by page so much like that. I felt immediately at home. It's a very different story. They're completely different characters, but yet there was something comfortable in each page as we were going through, and it really felt like kind of I don't want to say an epilogue, but if you get my vibe, it just felt like something that's saying, wow, you've missed this, and here it is again, that kind of vibe. And it just goes to show how when you connect with the creative energy of people who are working on a book, that we as fans, there's something that's there that when it works, it just works. And leaving Megalopolis, not Megalopolis, but has that kind of feeling to me. I felt immediately at home with it. How is that for you? Because the difference between working on this and working on a monthly book is you're working on a much larger scale project with this type of thing, because not only are you guys handling the creation of this larger hardcover, but I would imagine the production behind the scenes is a larger scale as well, because you don't have like a DC or a Marvel or a Dark Horse or something like that initially backing you. Am I right on that, or is it?
Well, there was coordination. I mean, it not in the creative end, just the technical end, getting the colorists lined up. We brought on Dave Sharp as letterer, and he handled the production and getting everything together. But I was I was functioning as editor, basically. You guys know you have your own thing. You'll kill for your own thing. You'll work your butt off for your own thing, more than you're making.
Yeah.
So that's why I really like Kickstarter. It's your own thing. I've done the 2 Kickstarters, and I'm not rich off them. Hopefully, Megalopolis expands into something else, but it's more or less just the satisfaction of doing your own thing your way and controlling it.
You can see just the passion and the love that went into this book, and that's something that I was really excited about, and I was deeply enjoying, because I always got that feeling from Six, that I could tell you all enjoyed what you're doing. This wasn't a job for you. There was something more. There was something more on another level. And Megalopolis, from just page one, I saw that beautiful horror that I always loved. And it's hard for me. Beautiful horror is the best description I came up with, especially for this book. You get some wonderfully haunting images, but it's never anything that made me go, whoa. I was never shocked or in awe. You had that beautiful balance of just enough of that grim so I know exactly what horrific thing just happened to that person, but I got to see the art style of it. That's something I always just absolutely love about what you've done with this as well as the past stuff.
I feel like I failed. I didn't shock you.
I was pretty sure I didn't want to be on the Kane school bus.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the creepier images. I mean, we have a lot of creepy images like that. The Gale's setup, those first 10 pages where there's like almost no dialogue, was a nice setup, and every panel told a little story. We got a little blowback from one backer who was very upset that there was a dead dog on page 2 or 3.
Well, and you tied that into the story later. So when I saw
Oh yeah. I think it's like sort of like my wife. She gets very upset when CGI animals die in movies.
Yeah. Well, and I saw that and I was like, whoa. But later when you tied it back into the story, I was like, oh, that's cool. And I actually went back and looked, and it's I'm an animal lover, and there was a whoa kind of moment, and that for me really helps set the rules and just everything that's going on, because you always think of the dun da da hero gonna save the puppy and save the little kitty from the tree. No, this one's dead. And I think that right there needed to have that grit without it being like a dead body. If that had been a dead body lying there, I think it would have lost something. But because it was this little sweet doggy that was just lying there dead, it added more of a whoa kind of vibe for me.
Well, that's universal, I think. There's a story about, you ever seen A Fish Called Wanda?
Oh, yeah.
John Cleese tells the story in previews. The scene where Kevin Kline eats the fish in the fish tank was much longer and went through every single fish, and the audiences couldn't take it. They could kill anybody they wanted to, but when it went to animals, that's when people had problems. I think that's a universal thing, which is good. You see that dog, it grabs your heart there a little bit. I hope.
Oh yeah, like with the Godfather with the horse's head in the bed. No one had any complaints about all the people who were slaughtered and killed, but there were groups that were in uprising over this horse's head. And I was like, oh,
Jim, when you're doing a project like this, do you find that you have time to put in more tiny details than you would normally get on a monthly book? Because I'm looking, for example, on the page with the Spring Rock Christian Fellowship Church, and today's sermon, "All I Love Is Dead," where the glass is smashed out. That just set a tone for we haven't seen any people yet at this point, and it just set a tone for how grim and bleak this was when you saw that people went to the level where they're smashing out signs like that. This is a society as we know it does not exist here. And I liked that establishment. But do you find with this type of project, because I really appreciated the tiny details like that, setting a mood and tone for me, which I would imagine on a monthly it's very hard to do as much of that as you would like.
It depends. It really depends on whether the writer's gotten me the script in a prompt, timely manner. If I've got less than a month to do the book, then yeah. But if I have a month, I can usually get all the crazy details I want to get in. This, we obviously took longer than I wanted to on the book, so I had a lot of time. We did put a lot of time into it. But something like that, that was in the script, but that was sort of the thing where Gale would just say, the sign says, "All I love is dead." Then it's up to me to go, well, let's see, how did they get to the letters? Oh, they must have broke the letters. And I mean, if you even look down on the bottom edge where there's still glass of the sign, there's a couple letters like that they didn't need that are discarded down there, you know. I'm just a detail nut, so I'm always throwing things in like that. And once you start, you have to keep going. As soon as you do one detail, then you've got to have all the details. If you're doing a room and you put one switch on the wall, then you've got to start doing plugs. And if you put something on the dresser, then it looks isolated. You've got to put more stuff on the dresser. So, but to me, details is what makes a setting real and come alive on the page. It also, the little trick there is sometimes if you spend a lot of time really establishing it and really putting a lot of detail into a large establishing shot, sometimes you don't even need to have a background in a couple panels because you've really established it in somebody's subconscious that where they are.
It's funny you mentioned the subconscious, because one of the things I've noticed as I've gotten older that and I mention this on the show all the time, that I did in my childhood because I didn't have the comic budget that I do now. You know, where we would get like 1 or 2 books, and I'd read it like 87 times in between waiting for the next issue because, you know, that you had 1 or 2 books.
If you had the budget now, then you could have bought 10,000 books.
Oh, no kidding. It's funny, as I'm seeing this sequence with what happens with Mina and the girl who's on the ground, reading that through the first time, and this is a great example how there's things that are going on subconsciously. There's little details that I read through. The first time I read through a story, there's things that you don't realize that are there for a reason, that when you read it through the second time, this sequence reads very different when you've read the book through the first time. Because you know who that girl is, and you know why Mina's apologizing to her. You're
talking about the mall scene,
Yeah. So you don't really know initially. You kind of do that she's borrowing things, but you don't realize exactly 100% what she's borrowed. I didn't until the second read through, and that was really. And I think because there was so much in a good way going on, I've really come to appreciate comic books that have this kind of detail. Because the second, third, fourth read-through, to me, is very rich because I'm still finding things. I'm a fan of the movie Airplane and Top Secret and stuff like that, because when you rewatch those...
little gags.
Yeah. Well, because there's constantly something that you're finding that you didn't notice before. And I think that there's something... and I'm not saying that in any way. I'm meaning that in an extremely positive way here. I love finding nooks and crannies and things that people put in there that they put a little extra effort into, that they mean for you subconsciously maybe to catch, that you're like, when you go back through, you're like, oh, wow. It's just really appreciated.
Oh, I appreciate your appreciation. As awkward as that sounds. It's not... I don't think about it so much in terms of what you're picking up consciously or subconsciously. I just put it in. And hopefully it's there. I actually don't even think about when it's going to be caught or not caught, if that makes any sense. I'm just rolling along, putting everything I can into the page.
The thing I loved about this sequence, and this was the first time, watching it, that, reading it, then the second time going back and reread, is just the look on the female victim's face. Once again, it just that the term beautiful horror and just that wonderfully haunting look on her face was just something that, I caught myself just staring, because you captured just this. It wasn't, is a combination of shock, awe of, oh my God, I'm about to die type of look, but it wasn't like, it wasn't a scared look. It was more of a bam. It was, the sudden, in my head, I'm picturing everything that happened to this person, and I see it as just being like a sudden, boom, death, an unknown, it's, obviously it was a hero came in, killed her, and she's thinking, oh, this is going to be a hero who's going to save me. No, it's not. And it was, you kind of capture that in her eyes with them being open and just the look on her face and everything. That was, when you kind of when you were looking at some of the stuff, did you go into like, this is how this person died and this is what they're going to think, or was it just did you just go with go with the gut?
Well, there's two aspects to it. One is knowing what the story is behind her. I knew that face should, I wouldn't say I was trying to make it haunting, but I knew that image should haunt not you, but should haunt Mina. So then the second part sort of dovetails into that is, she's a very specific face. She's not just a generic face. I mean, a lot of times when you're drawing a book, you've got a character come in who's going to die in the next panel 2 seconds later. They're just fodder. Sometimes you have a tendency to shorthand it, or I did. I would have a tendency to shorthand those, and I actually learned on Secret 6. Here you go. I'm going to test your memory. Now I can't remember what the issues were. It was towards the end, the government was sort of involved. That's when they had they sent the woman sending the Suicide Squad. That's what it was. When the Suicide Squad was in the storyline.
Mm-hmm. Amanda Waller?
The woman she was having problems with in the government. She had like a ponytail, I think.
Spy Smasher.
Exactly. Her assistant. Remember there's the meeting in the park with Amanda and the woman, and there's a guy picking up the dog shit in the background? Her assistant eventually got shot in the head in her office, and I didn't know that. I thought it was a character who was going to be there permanently, so I spent all this time to design this frizzy-haired, looking awkward, really spent time on her look. And then 3 pages later, she was shot. And I'm like, damn. Because the pages were coming in piecemeal. I hadn't gotten the whole script. But it also showed me that almost any time you're drawing anybody, even if they're there for a panel, try and draw somebody specific. It makes them more real.
This is Sean. This is a quick little aside. After recording this, it drove me so nuts because you know how when comics one of your favorite series and you just remember a sequence of events and you're trying to remember a name. The character he's mentioning was Agent Caleb, and it was the assistant to Spy Smasher. Jim was right in his reference and throwing out that it was Spy Smasher, but Agent Caleb is the character that he was talking about. So it's an interesting point how you take somebody who you don't realize is going to be a throwaway character, and all of a sudden the character takes on more life, and it was a powerful sequence. But I remembered the sequence enough that I went to look through the issues, so there was a definite power to the moment that he's referencing here.
I don't know if all that made sense, but
it does.
Oh, definitely.
That's where it went with that woman, that victim in the mall. It was thinking about what she looked like, what she should look like, really, instead of just, okay, here's a face, and we're on. That, I think, helps imprint her on you. And then Jason did a nice job, and you talk about the eyes, he did a really good job coloring the eyes.
When you are working with a colorist who you've worked with before, does that affect how you prepare the page? I mean, is there something to that, or do you pretty much so work at the same regardless of who you're working with? How does that work?
I work at the same. I just know whether or not I have to explain a lot when I send them to the colorist. If it's somebody new, I'll put more notes or explain exactly what I was trying to get. I think I worked long enough with Jason on Secret 6 that it was just short notes when I sent them to him. And then in terms of being like the editor, I was acting as editor on it. It was then tweaking them after they came back. Rarely did I tweak a lot, get a chance to tweak pages when I was working for DC, because the editor would just okay them and they'd go on. But it depends. I never adjust my art to the colorist. I just hope they know what they're doing and they'll understand the notes and they can pull it off. I've had plenty of bad coloring. I've had plenty of great coloring. It's just hit or miss on that. But with Jason, there was already a shorthand. And the biggest thing the biggest thing with Jason is I know his colors have a tendency to oversaturate on uncoated paper. So we made sure to do the book on coated paper, and I think the colors really pop nicely.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the production choices, because this book feels very high-end. It feels like we got these deluxe hardcovers that are coming out from the big two right now, and they're always on like a high-quality paper with, even the hardcover itself feels like something substantial. And this book, immediately, when I opened it up, I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, this is from a Kickstarter. And I mean, because usually with a Kickstarter, you're thinking of something that's more independent in its production. Right. And, I've gotten a lot of Kickstarters. I love them. I love the creativity that goes into, because you get product like this, but this felt like something being published by one of the large comic companies, and I was really impressed with that, because the difference in the page with the paper really shows. I mean,
well, the printer is one of the there's basically two printers that print for the majority of the books for Marvel and DC, and I used one of those printers. It was easier for me to contact them and just say, look, these are the specs I want. Because I was in the deep end a little bit, contacting printers. I'd say, okay, it wasn't a hardcover at the time, but I'd say it's a soft cover. And they go, what kind of lamination do you want on the cover? And I had no response because I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. There's aqueous, there's all these different, it's basically just the gloss coating, but there's all different kinds. So I found that it was easier just to contact the big printers and just say, look up your file on Secret 6 Volume 3. Those specs, give me quotes. So we paid a little more for the printer, not a lot. They were fairly competitive. It was also printed in the USA, which was important to us, and they were fairly competitive with somebody like China when you added in all the shipping and everything. So, and I was very comfortable with working with them that way. And then we did spend extra on paper. This isn't their budget-coated paper. It was one step up.
It's funny, when I'm looking at the book, one of the sequences I'm looking at is the guy flying through the sky. But the horror...
Which guy? Like,
it was the first one that got dropped.
The guy, you mean?
Yeah.
He didn't fly. He dropped.
Yeah. Well, the guy, I should say the guy that picked him up, he flew...
Oh, okay.
I think he flew temporarily. The close-up of the ankle. Like, we see the ankle in the background as Mina's looking up, like, in anger over what just happened. And you see the close-up of the ankle. I'm a big fan of Hitchcock horror. And those kind of films where, certain things are... We didn't see the whole guy. But just that right there was enough to put in my mind what the rest of the body had to look like.
Well, that was the point. Without showing the total gruesomeness, the severe twist and bend of that ankle. It's definitely been way out of shape.
And I appreciated the fact that earlier, when we see him getting snatched up, you see the one shoe left behind with the little blood trail. And when he's falling with the... flying with, crashing with style, if you will, he only has one shoe on. And I noticed, I was like, hey, cool, we got only one shoe. And I kind of like the fact that we got, again, that attention to detail. He left it back behind before. Man. Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't want, somebody coming back and saying, hey, he lost his shoe before. Well, the fans notice everything.
Is it hard to keep track of stuff like that? Because you're imagining how much time that you would spend on pages. And, if you're doing any kind of other work along the way, including, like, having dinner, to remember little things like that, like, he lost a shoe back on this page, and I need to remember that when I'm dropping him. How do you keep track of that? Or is it just something that you do naturally in your artistic flow? Or how do you... Because that... I know for myself... I would forget things like that quickly.
Well, if you go back into your now digital collection of Secret Six, especially my first 6 or 7 issues, you'll notice Scandal Savage's mole disappear and reappear. Same thing with Jeanette, because I would forget the moles. Mm-hmm. There was so much to remember on these characters, the moles, the stubble, so I wouldn't be that perfect. So on something like this was actually fairly simple. But there are some things that are dropped. If you look close, you'll sometimes see things that I just missed. Sometimes you ride with it, but hopefully you're on top of everything. You kind of want to be, you kind of have to be. I do print out every page as I finish it, and then I have them on my drawing table, so I refer back when I'm doing a character that I just did or a setting that I just did.
I'm a fan of survivor horror games, I'm of literature and things like that. One thing I loved about this is we're immediately given an establishing character that we're following in Mina. But along the way, as she is meeting these characters, I love stories where I feel like I'm journeying along with the person. And one of the things I thought you guys did a great job with was giving us an interesting cast of characters that we were trying to figure out along the way. Visually and through dialogue. Harold is a great example of that. Like, my feelings from Harold is probably like I was going this way, and that was like following a tennis ball. One minute I was like sympathetic for him. Next minute I thought he was ultra creepy. The next minute I'm like, yeah, I want to high five him. Dude's a hero. And I think all of those things are valid. Which that to me, the characters in this were visually, because you did a lot of moods with Harold. A lot of sequences where he visually, the look on his face and the things that he was focusing on and the way that he was carrying himself were being adjusted. And those were things where I'm like, wow, this guy came to life for me. Like, I feel like I know Harold. And I feel like there would be times where he's like that guy that's a friend of mine that I would be defending to other people, saying, you don't know the real Harold.
Right. Right. Yeah, actually, he was one character. I mean, in terms of character design, Gail didn't give me a lot of direction, just sort of basic descriptions. I don't think he was bearded in her description or anything. Unless it's something really specific about a character, she's just 40-year-old guy. His face, some faces I take to very easily. It was like that with the Penguin when I was doing Batman stuff. Just flowed out of my hand right away. And felt that way about Harold. I enjoyed drawing his face. I'm always trying to do a lot of acting with their faces and bodies. And, you know, people seem to respond well to the facial expressions I do on characters and the acting. I try to get into it. He probably, looking back on it, he probably did have the most varied emotional moments in the book, I would say.
It was amazing how, like, for quite a bit of the book, if you'd asked me, do you like Harold? I mean, do I love him as a character? Yes. But do I, is Harold a guy that I would want to hang out with? The answer is no. Then there's sequences where he really had to step up, and you're just like, and we'll talk about that. But it's one of the things that really stuck out for me with him was there were so many ways that you got to know Harold. As an artist, when you're developing a character and you're working off of the dialogue, you're working off of the script, but then you're also yourself trying to get to know how this person will carry themselves when they're in different moods. How do you do that? Because that was one of the things I really appreciate with him is visually in this early sequence with him, you see that moment where he's holding, the shirt. I don't know what young girls like. Harold, you're doomed. There's a distinct visual difference in this guy than when we first saw him in the initial establishing shot of him. And this was something that was very consistent with him. He was like a roller coaster. And I loved that. But how do you wrap your head around that when you're deciding who he is visually?
Well, it comes from the writing, pretty much. Gail wrote him as not an emotionally guarded person. Not that he's an open, caring, warm, wonderful human being, but in other words, the way she wrote him, and that moment there where he's trying to pick out girls' clothing, for him to be, he's not self-conscious about what he's revealing in his speech and his body language and his face. Another man might just not say anything and try and not show that they're confused as hell, holding up a girl's shirt. And I think he's that way through the whole book. He can come off, like you said, you didn't like him. He could come off sometimes. He can come off as a milquetoast. He could come off as this. He could come off as that. I think drawing him was the easiest. And once I had the feel for him, I think there's things I did that weren't called for. I mean, Gail would write the dialogue sometimes, and I would impose an emotion on it sometimes. Or sometimes, like, there's a sequence where the group is hiding around the corner from a threat, and it's 4 panels that go one after another. I don't know if you're recalling what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, actually.
All that, the reactions of the group, that was all stuff that I put in there. I'm not sure. I can't remember the exact script, but it might not have been. It wasn't a shot from the same angle, and I have characters sort of, and Harold's the one displaying the most emotion in that scene. So then, I knew who Harold was by then for sure, and I gave him that moment there of that type of emotion because he doesn't. I guess it's a lack of self-awareness.
I'm looking at that scene right now, and I remember seeing it, but I'll tell you, when I was first, you're focused on the hero that's possibly going to see them. And I was, you concentrated and I was focused on, especially because you had, again, a great gruesome scene right before that. And then you have this moment of just sheer terror. And Harold's expressions are just like, wow, that is kind of cool because it's the fear of then the anguish, then the, oh, thank Christ, just that relief as his hands in his, his face is in his hands. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the wimp at that moment.
It's funny because he was a character that, creepy was the first thought that popped in my head. Then I was like, okay, a little bit on the pathetic side, then a little bit on this. And he was one of the guys that I could kind of could see myself acting this way. I would be a bit. I think I would probably be a bit cowardly.
I never saw him as creepy.
I think part of it is because we were introduced to him with a half-naked female. And it's a teenager. Yeah. And I think that's why I had him initially had the creepy side to him. But then I quickly left creepy to pathetic and wimpy and scared. You know, and I was kind of glad.
I should have put a copy of Barely Legal in his back pocket.
Well, you know what it was? There's a sequence where Mina, and in my initial read-through, I think this is why I thought that, we didn't really know what was driving Mina's anger towards males in the first read-through. There's a point in time where she out-and-out attacks him as kind of leering at Lisa.
Overreacts to him.
Yes. So I think from that, because of the fact that Mina was kind of our avenue into this, my instinct was immediately to kind of side, okay, Mina noticed something maybe that I didn't even notice about this guy. So there was that part that added this. That's why I said he was kind of like a roller coaster. In that sequence, I felt like, okay, maybe he is being a creep there and we don't see it. And that's why I said earlier, this book reads incredibly differently the second time through in a great way. And I think that every rich story will do that, because when you have certain background knowledge, it's worth going back through and looking over it again and going, oh, wait a minute, this is where the motivation was for that sequence. Even Mina's initial opening in the beginning of the book, where because we haven't really talked about what the premise of the story is, because in the beginning you don't really know, other than the fact that we see the guy being dropped out of the sky by a winged character who's in this, very shadowed character up in the sky. It hasn't really been established yet that this is how global this really is in the world of Megalopolis. And that's one of the things that I think is really great about this story, because you see a Mina who's soft initially, apologizing, but then she instantly snaps into this, I'm in charge, I'm very strong, you are not going to take any form of advantage of me, I'm keeping an eye on you, and if you step out of line, this gun's going to do some harm to you, Harold.
Right, but you can also feel the wall, too. I mean, you can feel there's strength, but it's a wall.
Which comes down with Lisa in that sequence. The rich tapestry of this story is that there isn't a single character in this that's like a flat. All of the characters are very three-dimensional with multiple facets to them, and that's something that, like, I mentioned to you in an email that I would love to see this on the big screen. And when I say the big screen, it doesn't necessarily... I was thinking film at first, and I think the reason why I think film is I often compare hardcovers when they're contained stories to films when I think of comics, the serialized series to television shows. But this world is one that immediately needs to be on a screen of some sort because of the multifaceted characters you ride along with, which is something that I really enjoy, because I like all of them for very different reasons, which is always
personally
fun.
I think it would work better as a series. I think you can see where you could take the first graphic novel and expand it. Instead of it taking the course of about a day, you could take each section could be a little longer. We could get into the characters more.
Kind of how they did with Walking Dead.
Yeah.
When we take a look at this, there's a lot of story that could be told here that's off of these pages too. There's so many side stories that can be told in this world, because we're following one small group of characters where there's a backstory of a lot of things in this that, like, there's things that are in background. There's images that are on a wall that you're like, well, I would like to know what happened to them.
There's a lot. Well, we'll see how far we can go, but there is a lot that can be mined in the world we've created here, for sure.
Yeah, I was always curious about the stories of the heroes before all this craziness happened. Mm-hmm. That's something I would like to see. Just like, and there's a couple characters specifically, that I'm like, I think they would have some really neat, just backstories and really neat just who they are, because we've seen them at their worst here. I'd like to see them at their best.
I like them at their worst. But there's definitely thought processes into any of the characters at least the ones who are featured. There's thought processes into what they were or who they were before and what they are now, and that influenced how they looked, the costume design. A lot of times, sort of like with Fleet, Gale had just sort of listed Fleet the Speedster, and I just sort of went off the farm designing him and came up with a whole theory that in his insane state he never stops running. He's not even eating. So that's why he looks like he's almost skeletal. He's just malnourished himself almost to death. And the idea that he keeps running into things and just plowing through things, and the visor on his helmet is cracked, and I just ran all that out for Gale. She liked it and went with it. And I mean, that's the only reason he wears a helmet, so I could have it cracked and have that eye sticking out there. That's how that design came about, to have that creepy eyeball sticking out of that crack in his visor.
See, and he's one of the characters that I really did want to see what he was like before, especially hearing how you went through with the malnourished and stuff, because that was something I was like, man, I wonder if he always had that haunting look, and that's why he had the visor so he would have a hero look to him, so people couldn't see the rotting side of it. But I like where that went. That's kind of neat, dude.
Well, we'll see what we can do somewhere down the road. It did say Volume 1 on the spine.
I want a Jeff action figure with breakaway action.
A who?
Jeff. He's the one that Fleet got up close with and personal.
Yeah. That's actually one of the cameos.
Yeah.
That I can even, for anybody who wants to say hi to him at shows, he goes to shows and he wears a black T-shirt that says "Got Titans," like "Got Milk."
Mm-hmm.
You see him? That's Jeff from the book.
Oh, that's awesome.
He was one of the cameos, and he wanted to die like one of the Titans had died. And when it came up, I said, "Did any Titan get their head popped off?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Okay."
Nice. Oh, that's awesome.
I want a Jeff action figure.
And he's wearing a T-shirt that says "Photo Op" on it, and that's actually his short film his partner made called Photo Op.
Oh, that's
so
cool.
I put their logo on the T-shirt. We were having some fun with the cameos. There's one cameo. I asked the guy who his favorite team was, and it's Toronto Maple Leafs, so he's wearing a Toronto Maple Leaf shirt.
When we talked before about the speed of Fleet, the shot I think that said that the most for me, it's funny, with everything we're talking about with all the action sequences, it's that shot at the end when he's gone. And you see our main characters looking up at the ceiling and the walls. There's the words all over the place, including on the forehead of Lisa. That gave me this sense of he doesn't stop. Because when you see him taking the time to, well, it wouldn't be time for him, but the fact that he did all of that, instead of just moving on from his chosen path, just gave me this real sense of continual movement, because that was very instantaneous for our cast of characters, but for him it was, right. I'm sure it was some effort of some sort for him.
Yes, yeah. Well, no, not really. He's just used to it. That's how fast he is. It was an interesting, that sort of dovetails back to what you were asking me about the colorist. I could do more with that character, me being the contractor, hiring the colorist. Because we did a lot of times you see him moving, he wasn't drawn in the panel, he was drawn on a separate board. And I mocked up positions and blurs and JPEGs to show the colorist what to do with him. I like the way we had him moving, and I like that. Yeah, Gale. That was in the script. It's like 1 minute he's there, 1 minute he's gone, and he's written all over the wall. And then we had to really go away from reality when I said to Gale, I don't think it would wash off her forehead that easily. Do we have to have that through the whole story? And she goes, no, get rid of it. The Sharpie would have stayed on her head.
The pacing was something that I really enjoyed in the story. Like when we get into the Senator Bell sequences where she's interviewing all of the possible people that are reacting to this event. This is a major city in this world, and it's been overtaken by heroes gone wrong. And we still don't know yet at this point in time in the story what has happened to them to cause them to be this way. But those pages in particular, when you realize, wait a minute, this is such a big event that the government is having court sessions to basically say, hey, what was your role in all this? Questioning the way that it was handled. This pops up throughout the book. And I felt that they were really great breakaways to give a global sense of what's happening here. Because this would be something that the world would not ignore. The world would be worried, what happens if this expands outside of there? And
Right.
I loved that part of it. There's single pages that really, I think, just established a lot, and then you jump back into the story proper from that. But that kind of pacing was something that I really appreciated because it just gave me a sense of depth and of a feeling that this is a big world that this city is inhabiting. And there's something that I appreciate that.
It was a really good device she came up with to handle a lot of exposition. Besides the fact that the hearing does have some importance at the end of the story, it was a good device to handle, because in the first few pages, the only indication we have that how the world reacted to what has happened is the shot of the tank in the building, which is like page 2 or 3. There's a tank plowed through a building, so you can say, oh, okay, the Army has been here. They didn't just ignore what's been happening. But it was a good device to handle the little facts about, okay, why aren't they doing anything? Why aren't they blowing up the city? Why aren't they trying to get in? What's going on? And even just some of the little, what has happened, little notes that are touched on. And I really like the way she did it with sort of like mostly text, sort of like a script where we have the names of the characters, colon what they say, character colons what they say. I thought it worked well because we did have the several flashbacks to deal with, several different flashbacks, and they all needed to feel a little different. Mina's flashbacks are colored differently than the rest of the book. The rest of the book has a cool grayish feel to it, and her flashbacks are bright and warm, and that I wanted. That was my decision on look, so that we would know we weren't in the city anymore. We were at a different time. Another one of the flashbacks has a sickly tone to it, and this obviously said immediately we're somewhere else. We don't have to set anything. We don't have to let people know we're breaking from the story from a moment. It's very obvious that it's apart from the story. So yeah, I like the way those worked out.
I like the innocence of Mina in those sequences because when you take a look at her Nana, she almost looks like an older version of her that we see from the early part of the story. There's a family resemblance there, but also her demeanor. It's like she's almost been through something similar to what Mina has been through at that point, which lets us know immediately that Mina's this innocent person, but her world isn't as sweet as it looks when we see her enjoying her time with the raccoon. And I liked that because you're right, there's a softer tone there. It's this warm feel, but the grandma's really our avenue into all is not what it seems, and I loved that device in this. That was something that when I was looking over the 2 pages, I'm like, oh, that's really cool because there's something more going on there. And I like when there's a dual layer to a sequence like that. It's something for me I tend to appreciate.
Well, we're not giving anything away with discussing the first flashback. I mean, she hands a little girl a gun. It's definitely showing that there's something going on there.
Yeah, the words of wisdom she passes on as well.
Always carry a fully loaded gun. Words of wisdom.
There's one thing I want to kind of, because it won't spoil anything too much, because I want to talk about the art nature of this one. When we talk about flashbacks and things that just look a little visually different, Overlord, who's one of the characters in the story, one of the heroes in the story, we talk about his backstory in an issue of his book. But I really want to talk about the visual of that because it took me back to my childhood with the way books were colored and the way that artwork was done on the paper. Printing was different back then. It had more of a newsprint feel to it. And I immediately was drawn back to that. I liked that sense of being taken out of time on those 2 pages and then going back to the visual style that we're used to in Megalopolis. I thought it was a well-done device as well. And visually, it kind of took me back to, well, this is a character who had that background, but then something went wrong.
Right. We had to do it. I mean, it was her idea to do this old issue from that looks like it was 70s, 80s. I ripped off the Marvel masthead look and everything on the cover. Actually, it's probably 80s. Her idea was that issue is when they were relaunching the character, and as if whoever during the speculator craze had taken it and was doing a Jim Lee impersonation and trying to do it. But then the pages on the inside were supposed to be reprints from his 60s books. For that, I printed out a couple of Carmen Infantino pages just so I could get the feel for those interior pages. I think it worked out okay. I think it got the feel, and then had Jason color it with big dot patterns like the old printing.
One of the things that's said by one of the characters in the story was how they moved to Megalopolis because they would be safer, because all the heroes were there. And the premise of this story is our group trying to escape. That's really kind of the neat flipping around of the story that from the world that we're used to. And I'm kind of doing it this way on purpose because obviously, Jim, if there's things you want to say, if you've got more questions, I want to make sure we don't spoil too much of this story because I want to talk to you about this. It's going to be released.
Well, we do say that on the blurb on the back, so the safest city in the world until.
It's going to be released for people who didn't get in on the Kickstarter. They're going to have some opportunities to grab the book. Can we talk about that a little bit? I know we mentioned Dark Horse is going to be publishing it.
It looks like it. We're about to sign the contracts. The thing I discovered at the shows, when I did the original Kickstarter campaign, it spanned two conventions, so I could hand out tear sheets and promote it there. The thing that I discovered was how many people who were into comics didn't know what Kickstarter was. And I ended up spending more time explaining Kickstarter than explaining the project almost when people would come up. And so that I immediately knew how many people were not even going to know about it. I'm grateful for all the backers, and I think we had a great success with the backers. But compared to the number of people who were avid Secret Six readers and how many copies were sold each month, we were at about a quarter of that or less. So I knew there were a lot of people that probably still don't even know about it. And there's people emailing all the time, oh, I just found this, or how can I get this, or Gail seeing people at shows and whatnot. We had always intended to figure out some sort of way to get to the stores, but I realized it was basically just a necessity now because of how many people don't know about it or never even heard of it that really liked Secret Six.
Is there also going to be a digital release?
Yes. Comixology is handling our digital fulfillment as soon as we get that done. At some point, we're going to have to figure it out because it looks like the Dark Horse store edition will be released not until September, which has to do with distribution and bookstores and stuff. So we're not sure the exact date that we're going to have the digital version available for sale on Comixology. But yes, there will be a digital version on Comixology.
Yeah, I want the digital version too. So I'm very highly interested in that.
Well, we've got the additional content. It's basically Gail's. We've got stuff on character designs. There's also going to be a couple pages showing how a page goes from script to finished. There's also, towards the one end of the book, there's that large grouping of superheroes. I'm going to have a one page that has a key telling you who all those different characters are because they're never seen in the book until that moment and then never seen again. And Gail is doing a prose piece, and she got me the first draft, and she wants to make sure it's perfect before we can get it all together. So we're still, unfortunately, getting the digital edition together, which then has to go to Comixology, and they've got to do the file conversion. So it might be a month away still. So sorry about that.
For people listening, we talked about basically a quarter of the book. That's how much depth there is to this. There's so much story that builds off of this. But you also included in the back, you did a story with Jason Wright and Dave Sharp called Wonder Boy. It's a side story, which I love. We mentioned earlier that, that this world is rich with side stories that are potentially sold. It's a side story of one of the... Well, I don't want to say just one of the sidekicks. It's also a side story of a civilian going through this. I think we can talk a little bit more in depth about this one, can't we?
Yes. When we got all the extra pages through the Kickstarter campaign with the stretch goals, I just had this idea, and I asked Gail if it was okay. I sent her the idea, and she said, cool, go with it, which was great. She was very gracious to let me do it. And I've done writing before. I used to do writing when I was at Caliber Press doing all my own stuff, and then I've done an arc a 2-issue arc in Exiles. I've done plotting. I wrote an issue of Green Arrow that I didn't even draw, stuff like that. So I'm always trying to get more writing out there. The story itself is we're looking at a sidekick. I was basically thinking about the non-powered people, because it seems that this has only affected the people with powers, the superheroes with powers. So I just started thinking about where the non-powered people are, and usually the non-powered are the sidekicks, or often like Robin or Bucky. The title of the story was, at this point, I was going along, it's not supposed to be Robin, but I was just like, screw it, I'll name it Wonder Boy, because it just fit.
The superhero's Tomahawk, in this case, who is another non-powered hero. And it was great to see this girl, this character again that we're following. I loved that she was a civilian, because she's doing the things that we as fans would all love to do, walk through the secret base. The public base or whatever, just to be able to walk through and to see all of the things that were collected, the gadgets from the villains, the trophies that were in there, the stuff that, that lore is what is a draw in comics. And I found myself looking through different cabinets and everything, even the key that was on the wall. We have articles, old costumes.
You also notice on the wall is Tomahawk's old costume framed on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
In the big shot. I've even got backstory to his old costume.
And that stuff is great, because that, again, this is a character that's been around for a while. And probably when he had that first costume, I was like wondering to myself, like, well, then he probably didn't have a sidekick yet then. And then when he changed to his new, when he got a sidekick, he changed his costume, kind of like Batman changed up his suit when he got Robin. And it was, all kinds of cool stuff like that was going through my mind. And
I had a lot of fun with the little. You could throw out gags. I could throw out gags like the stuff in the trophy case, and her thoughts, her caption boxes, like the Escher gun. I could just not have to explain that. It was so much fun to just do these weird things that made no sense. What would the Escher gun do? I don't care.
I like the Space Bud.
Space Bud, yeah. Well, we can't trust her memory too well for that. But I actually have a funny, disgusting story about designing her, if you'd like it.
I would.
I knew I wanted her to be a young black girl, and I wanted a very specific hairstyle to her. So I went to look up some reference online, which is what I usually do. I go to Yahoo or Google, I'll put in something, and all the images will come up, and I'll go through images. So I go to Yahoo, and I put in teenage black girl. The most disgusting stuff I've ever seen in my life comes up.
Oh, God, yeah.
It was all pornography. I was like, oh, my God, scariest I've ever seen. So I immediately hit the back button and put in hairstyle, and that was fine. Then I got headshots of different hairstyles. But that was a shock at whatever time at night to have all the pornography pop up in front of me. Oh, my God.
Wasn't that pretty sad that like, civilians don't pop up from that first?
Just putting in that's I guess, the number one search is for pornography on that. I wanted a very, very specific hairstyle. She may be in Volume 2. We don't know.
I liked Scout's Psycho moment, the movie Psycho, where basically Tomahawk was like Mother.
Yeah. There's a lot to it. That was originally going to be... Actually, it was going to be the roles were going to be reversed. Originally, that was going to be Southern Belle. Are you familiar with Gail's Woman in a Refrigerator?
Yes.
Yeah.
Girlfriend in a Refrigerator? I immediately thought of that, and I said, I can't do that. So I said, well, what if it's reversed? And that spun the revelation of Scout in a completely different direction that I liked, made it a more interesting revelation when you get the twist about his little thing that we don't want to talk about too much.
And you mentioned that the Tomahawk Scout Bell, that was something that they were the character, another one of those characters I really wanted to read their stories about them before, because that team dynamic would definitely have a lot of room for some really interesting, cool stories coming out of them.
Right. Well, it's also, I mean, if you look at the poster, Southern Belle doesn't even look like she belongs.
Right.
They're a team, and she's the outsider. And that's the feel I wanted. Plus, as a nod to the Secret Six fans, that's how her dreads, her ponytails, are just like Jeanette's.
Yeah.
So that was my little nod to them. And she may pop up in the second volume, too. I'm not sure, but she may. Meaning the main story.
One of the things I really liked about this world was what Jim was mentioning. There are so many characters that I would love to see backstory of. There's so many situations that I would love to see more of. And that's the sign of a great and rich world, is when you want to know more. I found myself, especially in multiple read-throughs, thinking off the page a lot more, where I was taking certain sequences way beyond what I should even be thinking about them. But that's, which honestly, for longtime listeners of the show, we did a lot of episodes on Secret Six. And the reason why we did a lot of episodes on Secret Six, that was a crazy, wacky book that did the same thing. You would have certain sequences that was a panel or something that would just make you go, but if Catman and Deadshot did this, then you were thinking that. And, and that was one of the great things about that book. That's why I think spiritually this is a successor to that. There's a depth to this that I think comes from great storytelling, that when you can see different layers to it, and this is a world that I wanted to see more of. Jim, was there anything else? My Jim, I should say. was there anything? I've got two Jims here. Was there anything else that you wanted to say? Because I don't want to brush over anything, maybe questions that you had.
Well, one of the things I was kind of curious about with Mina and Chaz, and just how they first met and all that stuff that just, because in my head, again, Sean was talking about off-page thinking. I was thinking a lot of that with the different heroes, but those two, that was something I was really thinking about, like, because he had to work really hard just to get Mina to drop the wall, to talk to him, much less start a relationship. And just everything that he had to go through, that's the story, another one of those stories I would love to see.
See, that stuff for me, and like especially with the heroes, the crazy heroes. Now, Gail and I haven't discussed any of this. It's not. I'm not saying what's going to happen. Personally, I prefer that stuff not to be shown. I like you to wonder about it. I like you to wonder what that guy's backstory is, and just wonder about it, because it'll never be as good as the anticipation in your head. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I prefer things to be inferred. I'd prefer not to give complete stories I'd like to see them crazy. Maybe we can see what happened when they first went crazy, but I personally wouldn't like to see what they were doing before, because I actually think what the reader envisions in their head is better. I think what you're envisioning about the backflips and the perseverance that Chaz had to have had is better than what we would actually do. Especially since Gail may have thought of it. I didn't even think of that angle. You thought of it. It's sort of implied, but I never really contemplated it that much. I like when the reader's contemplating. I like the reader to do the work. I don't like everything laid out for a reader. You know what I mean?
I found myself thinking a lot about, in the same way you're talking about, Mina and her dad. Wondering, things like, did she ever have any good memories with her dad?
Yeah.
As that was discussed. Yeah. And also, did she encounter him after the incident that we see with her in the story? And there's certain things I'm being deliberately vague about for people listening, because when you read the book, these are things I want you to experience in the book. But that relationship is something that I wondered about, what that was like. And
I'm not sure how much more Gail has planned, so I can't even hint spoilers at that. I'm not sure exactly how much she has planned. We've really just started to talk about a second volume in a very skeletal way. We're still trying to get everything done with the first volume.
I find that as a reader, though, I enjoy wondering about those things. And some of those things, the creative team winds up having a story for, where they, spell it and flesh it out for me. And I'm completely into that, because usually when those things start being fleshed out, there's usually a modern day story reason to do those flashbacks that informs that. Other times, like you're mentioning, it's cool to just leave your readers wondering, because that's stuff I was already doing in Volume 1. And it's always fun to see whether or not the creators will play with that or not, and verify anything that I might have been thinking. We do that with film, we do that with television, we do that with novels, we do that with comics. That's a sign that you're into the story. I think there's usually a problem if you're not doing that, because...
Yeah, I think that's the problem with a lot of media, is don't let you do that. They give you way too much, and really pile it on and assume, especially like the network TV shows, they have to assume the lowest intelligence level of their viewership, because they're trying to get such a broad number of viewers. So everything gets dumbed down and everything is shown. There's that. I don't know where the line comes from, but it's a lot of American storytelling is say what the character is going to do, have them talk about doing it, then show them do it, then have them talk about having done it. And it's just point A to point B with nothing in between. The nice part about Gail is she takes so many left turns when you're reading. You're never really sure if anybody's plan is even going to start getting into process, because she takes so many nice little left turns to keep you guessing.
Do you guys run into, when you do a Kickstarter, is there a different sense of, like, I imagine when the campaign's going on, it's you have this nervousness of, are we going to reach our goal? You know, are the right people going to become aware of this, that they know that, like, hey, I was a fan of the Secret Six, or I was a fan of your work, Gail's work, before on other projects, that they were drawn to it. But then when you finally hit that goal, and you hit some stretch goals and you know, all that kind of stuff, at the end when it's done, is there a certain party that goes, wait a minute, now we've got to actually do this? Do you hit that point? Does it work like that? Or is there an excitement to it? Is there a fear? Or is it like a combination of emotions that goes on? I don't know if this, I guess what I'm getting at, does this work differently than a project would work with when you're working for a comic company to do this?
Well, obviously, because I don't have to do anything else other than just sit and draw. It's the pressure of it being ours. I never had any fear with the Kickstarter, maybe ignorance of how all the others have gone before, anybody who hadn't made their amount, but I was confident we were making our amount. I was confident we were going to go over the amount, and that was because I knew the fans. I knew from conventions, everybody just keep coming up to us. I mean, my favorite story is the year they canceled Secret Six, and it was out in San Diego, and Secret Six was announced that it was canceled. It hadn't all been printed yet, and the panels in San Diego were for the New 52. They were doing a panel on the Batman books, and Gail was up there because of Batgirl. I had people come and tell me this, and even a few editors come by and tell me that the first half of the panel was taken up with people bitching and moaning about Secret Six being canceled and commiserating with Gail. So I knew there was I knew that people really liked the book, and I appreciated the hell out of the fact how much people really liked the book. They still come up constantly at shows talking about the book, and people dressed as the characters still. They're not even in continuity anymore. So I never really had a fear of not making the amount. I don't think I had any fear through the whole thing. It was daunting because I had never quoted prices, been arranging all the printing, doing all that. It was daunting, but it's energizing too. You know, it's taking control. I'm sort of a type A personality anyway. And I think the only thing I was afraid was we were going to reach 150,000 and I was going to have to shave my head. That was the last stretch goal.
You know, it's funny on the show. I was just thinking about you now. It just as we were talking about, like you were mentioning that people at panels, you know, their love for the series on the podcast, and it's not something I consciously do. You always will talk about runs for comparison purposes, as far as saying, you know, these were runs that meant something to me. So when a new run starts to hit a certain point where you're like, wow, this run's had some validity now as being like, you know, it's had a certain number of issues that make it like substantial and memorable. There's books I always reference, and two of them from DC are books that you were heavily involved with. The Peter David Aquaman run that you were involved with, which really, for me, was my introduction to you. You know, at that time, I had become familiar with your artwork through that. And then Exiles, I got to know you from that as well. You know, then you became a name to me. I really started to get into your work. So that's a run that I regularly reference on the show just as being one that just stands out for me. I'd actually compare the current run of Aquaman to that a lot because that run became my measuring stick of comics. And Secret Six is another one I just throw out regularly, and Starman is another book that I throw out. There's certain books that for me...
Starman was great.
There's certain books for me that are in that short list of full runs that I like to reread. You know, if there's a day where I'm like, I want my feel-good book, that book that I can just get absorbed into. And those are certain runs that do that. And they're really important for us as fans to point out now, because there's a different level of accessibility to classic runs on titles now than there's ever been before. The immediacy of being able to go to your comic shop and get a trade or a hardcover, go online to get a trade or a hardcover, to go on an app and get full runs, or they do bundles all the time of runs. Now they're doing a lot more digitally, quote unquote trade bundles as well. There's a certain immediacy now, which I think is fantastic as fans, because I'm a reader. I want to see, I want to experience, I want to be a part of the full run. And the ability now that we have as fans to be able to get that, I think it's why it's more important than ever as fans to get out there and shout out those runs that have been throughout comic history, straight on through to present day, important to you, to let people know what they should be reading. Because there's a lot of quality out there. And
I appreciate it.
And I love that kind of... I mean, your work has certainly been on just projects that I've loved. Right away when I think of things like Secret Six, Aquaman, Exiles. I remember when at the time I was reading Aquaman, it was one of two books I was reading. Just because I was in college, wow. I didn't have, much of a budget at the time. Was a lifelong comic fan. I needed to have that fix, and it was a book that was just really important to me. So
I've been lucky with a couple runs. I've been with a few of my runs, just career-wise. I got Peter David was great on Aquaman. I really enjoyed working on that. Plus, it was a character I always liked. Judd Winnick on Exiles was just a blast. And then working on Secret Six with Gale. I mean, the interesting part about Aquaman and Secret Six is they both got canceled.
Which, in both of those cases, they were... I remember the cancellations of both. I was devastated. Because they were both... when books are on your short list, every month you're going to them first, and all of a sudden they're no longer available. That's horrid as a fan. It really is. It's
big money though.
I see it.
My biggest runs are Walt Simonson's Thor.
Oh, great material.
Justice League International. The Keith Giffen.
Oh yeah.
The Mattias, and then Tomb of Dracula.
Oh, nice.
I recommend that to people. That was. I mean, it felt. You read it, there is a dated feel to it in terms of storytelling because it was back then, and I don't mean dated in a bad way, but you can tell when it was written. But the whole run of that is especially when you get to the end of the original Tomb of Dracula, it's fantastic stuff.
You have very diverse influences. I like that. I respect that because I think it shows in your work that there's a lot of variety to what you bring to the table. And I think it because of your influences.
I'm also not sure I look like anybody. I don't know. I don't think I can see... I can say, anybody can say, oh, he looks like so-and-so. You can tell who Phil Jimenez was influenced by for his career. I love Phil's stuff, but you can tell who his influence was, George Perez.
You know what'll validate that? You were just on a Red Lanterns issue. The second I turned the first page and took a look at the page, I knew it was you. Which, a lot of times, I'll have to, I'll wait till I get to the creative team, and I'll recognize certain things, and that's not. I mean, there's artists who have very definitive styles, and you're one of them. It's I immediately noticed it. I was really excited because I'm like, oh, I didn't know, because you and I had been talking about putting this together, but we hadn't talked about any current work at the time because we were really focused on getting something together for Leaving Megalopolis. So it was one of these random things where all of a sudden I was paging through the book and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. This is really cool. I didn't know he was doing something.
Yeah, I've been helping out on Red Lanterns a little bit. It's not like, I'm not saying it's conscious, it's just how I draw. It's not like I try to be specific about it, it's just the way it comes out of my hand. But I've got a lot of influences, and I was very heavily influenced by Heavy Metal magazine. I'm the European artist, and I'm a huge Mobius nut. But I don't think you see Mobius in my stuff. There's just so many different artists I love.
You know, Is there work coming up? Because I want to make sure we don't forget to do this. That I know there's certain things you can't shout out because there comes a point in time where those announcements need to be held by the companies you're working for. But is there anything coming up that you can announce now, or anything that we should be looking out for down the road that you can tell us about?
I'm in this bouncing around phase, helping out with Red Lanterns. I'm doing a little short in Gail's. She's doing Legends of Red Sonja.
Oh yeah.
And I'm doing a little. There's extra backups in the story done by various female writers, and I'm bouncing in for an 8-page there.
Nice.
Written actually by Blair Butler, if you remember her from G4 TV.
Absolutely.
Yes, she was a big supporter of Secret Six, which is basically the reason I'm doing the story, to thank her. And I did a cover for Valiant. I did a cover for IDW Judge Dredd. I'm just sort of bouncing around. I've got some more covers lined up and maybe a project or two. But the last year or so, I've been just dedicated to Secret Six mostly. Not Secret Six, sorry. Wow, edit that out. Megalopolis.
No, wait, are you kidding? I honestly would like to, I'll do a whole reel of you saying you're dedicated to Secret Six for the last year. Jim Calafiore announces that Secret Six is coming back.
No, I don't think she'll ever come back. I got that feeling.
If that comes back, the band's got to get back together. That's all I got to say. Because that's what made that book special to me. I think, when a team gels... that's why Leaving Megalopolis I really want to thank you for agreeing to come on and chat with us about this. I'm so thrilled that there was a number 1 on the side of it. Because anytime you see that number, that means that there's hopefully the opportunity to get more, which I want more of this. Immediately when I was done with the end, that was the hardest thing about the story, was getting to the end. I'm like, wait a minute. That number 1 was very comforting.
It was tough for us to get to the end of it too. The funniest thing was, all these supplementals have now been kicked into the digital edition, and that was because Gail kept writing more story. And I knew we were coming to the end, and I'm like, this isn't ending in 5 pages, is it? Like, no. So our end, we didn't want to let it go, apparently.
Your website, too. Let's shout that out to fans so that way.
Calafiore.
Just to make sure. You know what? I think a lot of times as fans, you mentioned that with the Kickstarter, sometimes not all of the fans knew about the Kickstarter, things like that. And the reason why I want to shout out your website in particular, I think we as fans sometimes forget that when we're done reading the book, we really should look for creators' websites to follow their work elsewhere. Because I'm like a kind of a hybrid reader. There's certain characters that I know and love that I adore and follow and all that. But then there's creators who I love following to their projects as well, wherever they're at. And if I don't know about them, I don't grab them because I didn't know. But the second that I know, I jump to stuff like this. One of the positives, I think, of the internet nowadays is just the ability to get the word out that, hey, I'm doing this. Or, check out this. Or I've got a cover over here. You were mentioning the cover you're doing for things like Valiant and stuff like that. I love that kind of stuff. I like knowing where to follow creators, too.
Always check out creators' websites because we put extra stuff up there. I've got my Crooks and Nannies strip running on my website. So it's in its 4th year now. A lot of creators, especially now with Kickstarter, a lot of creators are doing their own stuff and posting it on. And some people have been running strips or books or whatever on their own sites for years. So there's always going to be a lot more content. And that's the nice part about the website. I've got a couple more Kickstarters that I'm planning, different projects, and that's where I'll post images and teasers about it.
I'm wearing my Crooks and Nanny shirt right now. Actually, I got myself in the mode for it.
There you go. Yeah, the last page of the book, it says coming soon, volume 2, because the first volume was the first 2 years. Last page says coming soon, volume 2 in 2 years, and it's already been a year. And I'm like, wow, the time is just flying. I'm going to have to do a Kickstarter for a second volume pretty soon.
Did this year go quick for you when the year that you were working on Leaving Megalopolis? Does that go quick for you when you're working on that? Because you had, while you were doing that, if I'm remembering correctly, wasn't the Crooks and Nannies Kickstarter going on during that time as well?
Yeah, I put up the Crooks and Nannies Kickstarter. I can't remember when. It was February of this year, I think. January or February of this year. But that was easy to do, and I also made a post on the Leaving Megalopolis Kickstarter that it wasn't taking any time out for me working on Leaving Megalopolis because it was all done. It's work that had been done, the strip, the first 2 years of the strip, 2011, 2012. So, but there was some time that had to go into putting it all together and then shipping them, and that definitely didn't have as many backers as Leaving Megalopolis, so it was much easier to deal with.
I liked the whole, it was kind of cool the way Kickstarter works, the community aspect that begins to get developed there. The updates, and even, before the project has gotten enough people backing it in order to get off the ground, just seeing different videos and texts and things like that about what's going on with the project.
Did you watch my video for Cooks and Nannies?
I sure did.
It was interesting.
The video fit Crooks and Nannies.
Well, that's when I did it. I'm like, if you don't like this video, you ain't gonna like the book. That was the best way to put it.
That was great. Like, he's having a whole bunch of fun in this video.
Oh yeah. I got to figure out how to top it for the second volume.
Yeah, that was cool. But that's the kind of stuff that I really like about Kickstarter, is you feel like you're a part of the project in some capacity. There's an interaction that's there that's different than when you get a normal project announcement. You get news tidbits, but it's usually on a company's website, and eventually you get a release date, and there's not that sense of back and forth interactivity that you get when you're involved in a Kickstarter. So it's
definitely an aspect of it.
Yeah,
definitely. It's the backer feels, and rightly so, that they're getting in on something that nobody else is in on, that it's something that is ours, is theirs, in the sense that they're approving it. It's not an editor giving it a green light. They're giving it the green light. It's cool to be first.
Guys, is there anything that I left out that either of you wanted to mention? I wanted to make sure that we got to everything that everyone wanted to say. So did I leave anything out?
Well, I just want to make sure you do realize how much we enjoyed this. I know we can be a little bit subtle sometimes in our appreciation of the artwork. So I just want to make sure you do realize that, this was an enjoyable read.
Oh, I'm glad. And hopefully things keep going. Like I said, we're definitely looking towards Volume 2, timing of it. We're also undecided on where we're going with it. Are we going to Kickstarter it again, Kickstarter Volume 2 or not? We still have to make all these decisions. So we're really just in the beginning stages of it, but we're hoping that we can keep it going.
That's awesome. Jim, I want to thank you very much for all the time you've given us tonight. It's been really great to talk with you. Thank you, as Jim said, thank you so much for the work and effort that all of you guys put into this amazing project, because...
and thanks for the support. I know you let me come on when we started the campaign, or you mentioned it when we started the campaign. I can't remember which. And every time you mention it, it's a big help. We appreciate it for sure.
Any project you've got coming up, I would love to do something like this again, because it's always a lot of fun to talk with you about your design and the background behind these projects, because I'm a big fan of your work. So thank you very much for your time.
You won't get away from me this time, Buster.
I want to once again take the opportunity to thank Jim Calafiore for joining us on this episode, and his website is jimcalafiore.com. Calafiore is spelled Calafiore, and it's jimcalafiore.com, and I highly recommend checking it out for his extra web content, including Crooks and Nannies. Just a great opportunity to check out his website and get that free content that Jim always provides. I like, as I mentioned on this episode, to follow creators' websites to see what projects they're involved in. So if you have a chance, please check out Jim's site. It's a great opportunity. Want to remind everyone about our show voicemail line. We didn't do voicemails on this episode, but they will be coming back for our next one. It's on Skype, which you can follow on drnorge, or you can do 1-440-388-4434 from any telephone. And we love having you part of your show. Our next episode, we are going to be discussing the Justice League War direct-to-video release from DC. Our thoughts on it, how it compares to the comic, how we like the portrayals, because this is really the first new 52 animated offering. So there's going to be a tone difference with some of the characters, lots of changes, lots of things to discuss. So that's going to be our next episode, just to kind of talk about what it's like to see these characters come to life in their newer versions on the big screen. So that will be then. Also want to shout out that we have a wonderful Facebook group community. It's Raging Bullets Facebook group. This is different from our Facebook page. We have a regular Facebook page and a Facebook group. We have RagingBullets.com, our show website, where I always put on updates on where the show is headed, what the status is with editing, because I like you guys to be involved in what's going on with the podcast. We also have Google+, a Twitter account that leads directly to our webpage. So if you're somebody that likes to get updates from websites on Twitter, if you follow our Twitter site, I always post directly from our show website, RagingBullets.com, to Twitter. So it's a great opportunity to find out what's going on in the podcast as well through Twitter. So we love the community and our Facebook group. Again, I know I shout this out all the time, and if you listen to the show regularly, I just want to once again say what a wonderful community it is, because it's grown well beyond the show. It's labeled the Raging Bullets community, but it's really so much more beyond that, and it's because of the quality podcasters that post there, comic creators that post there, listeners, friends of the show, but also people are inviting friends of theirs maybe who don't listen to the podcast. I've actually had a couple people who've messaged me that just said that either they found the podcast through the group or they just enjoy the conversation there, and that's why they're in the Facebook group. And please invite your friends that maybe don't listen to the podcast. They don't have to be podcast listeners to be a part of that group. I look at that as just a fun comic community to really just get the word out about comics we're enjoying, topics we want to talk about, hopefully in a safe environment where it's okay to just geek out and have a good time and really get to the roots of issues that we want to talk about as fans. It doesn't have to be limited to comic. There's a lot of pop culture topics that are going on there as well, and I just really want to thank everyone who's involved with that group, because it's gone so far beyond my expectations, and it's really due to the quality of people that are there. We will see everyone next week with Justice League War.
Bye! Flying through space and time, 1,000 different lifetimes. Faded for love and loss and incredibly clear sightlines. Swinging your mace around, such a practical outlook. Helping the JSA and occasionally supporting your own book. Hawkman, Hawkman. Eagle eyes can't see, Hawkman, your plan. And what you do to me, Hawkman. The villains are closing in, be they Thanin Guard or Egyptian. Working so hard to thwart you and Hawkgirl's mission. The odds are not on your side, and danger seems to stack up.